It was a Tuesday, a quiet late afternoon, the kind where the sun hangs low, painting the city in warm, forgiving light. I remember thinking how perfect the moment felt. I had just left the library, a stack of books in my backpack, my headphones on, lost in a podcast. A simple, ordinary day, the kind you take for granted. My neighborhood isn't fancy, it's real, lived in, but it's home, and I felt safe there, or I used to. Then the cruiser appeared, a dark shadow in my peripheral vision. It wasn't speeding, it was gliding, slow, deliberate, like a shark circling. I barely registered it at first. Police cars are part of the landscape. They pass all the time. But this one didn't pass. It slowed. Right beside me. My music faded slightly as I became aware of its presence. The window began to hum down. Slowly. Anticipation, cold and unwelcome, prickled my skin. A uniform. A stern, chiseled face. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over me. A familiar weight settled in my gut. That feeling. The one that tells you you're being seen, but not truly seen. Judged, categorized, before a single word is spoken. "Where are you headed, son?" His voice was gruff. Not a friendly inquiry. It carried an edge, an accusation wrapped in a question mark. I pulled out my headphones. "Just walking home, sir, from the library." I tried to keep my voice steady, respectful, the way my mother always taught me. "I was just studying." He scoffed, a dismissive sound. His gaze lingered on my backpack, on my hoodie, even though the hood was down. "Studying, huh? Looks more like you're loitering, or casing." Casing? For what? My mind raced. I'm a student. I work hard. I follow the rules. This was absurd. The blood started to pound in my ears, but I kept my face neutral. I tried. "No, sir, I assure you. I live just 2 blocks that way." I pointed. My hand trembled slightly, but I kept it down. I remembered all the stories, all the warnings. Don't make sudden movements. Don't be disrespectful. Don't give them a reason. He leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped, but it hardened. "I'm not asking for your life story, boy. I'm asking for ID and to see what's in that bag." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. He had no probable cause. I knew that. My mother. She made sure I knew my rights. But telling him that? It felt dangerous. The air crackled with unspoken tension. "Sir, I haven't done anything wrong. I don't believe I need to show you my bag." My voice was barely a whisper now. My throat felt tight, dry. His eyes narrowed. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Oh, you're one of those now, are you? Think you're above the law? Trying to get smart with an officer?" His hand went to his belt. A deliberate movement, a silent threat. The weight of his authority pressed down on me, suffocating. "No, sir, just trying to understand." The words felt weak, useless. "You understand this." He opened his door, stepped out. He was tall, imposing. His shadow fell over me, blocking the last rays of the sun. "You're acting suspicious. You're refusing to comply. That's resisting, and that means you're coming with me." Resisting? I was standing still. My hands were visible, my shoulders tensed, my entire body screaming for escape. But I didn't move. I couldn't. He grabbed my arm. His grip was rough, forceful. The suddenness made me flinch. My backpack swung around awkwardly. He spun me, pushing my hands behind my back. The metal, cold, unforgiving. The click echoed in the sudden silence. Handcuffs, tight, so tight, digging into my wrists. Humiliation, hot and stinging, flooded my entire being. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Not to me. I was a good kid, a good man, just trying to make my way. And now I was being treated like a hardened criminal, on my own street, in broad daylight. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I fought them back. I would not give him the satisfaction. I would not break. Not here. Not now. I fixed my gaze on a spot beyond his shoulder, tried to breathe, to anchor myself. He gave a harsh tug, pulling me towards the open door of the cruiser. My legs felt like lead. My mind screamed. My mother, what would she say? She had always been my rock, my guiding star. She taught me to stand tall, to speak truth to power. But what could she do against this? Against this casual, crushing injustice? Just as my head dipped to enter the back seat, a car pulled up, not fast and screeching, but with an air of decisive authority. A sleek, dark sedan. It stopped a few yards behind the police cruiser. I didn't turn my head fully. Couldn't. But I caught a glimpse. The driver's door opened, and a figure emerged. A familiar figure. Then I heard her voice. Clear, strong, unmistakable. It cut through the tension like a razor. It held a certain weight, a resonance. "Officer, is there a problem here?" My mother. Relief, so potent it almost buckled my knees, surged through me. But it was mixed with a fresh wave of dread. She was calm, too calm. I knew that look, that tone. She hated injustice more than anything. And this was injustice personified. The officer let go of me for a moment. He turned, his posture stiffening. Annoyance clouded his face. He probably thought she was just another interfering parent, another nosy neighbor. He didn't know. He truly didn't know who he was talking to. He adjusted his uniform. A sneer, subtle but unmistakable, formed on his lips. "Ma'am, this is a police matter. I suggest you step back before you become part of the problem." My mother didn't move. She just stood there. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. She looked at me first, a quick, reassuring glance that spoke volumes. "I'm here. You're safe." Then her eyes, sharp and intelligent, moved back to the officer. They narrowed, just slightly, but enough. And that's when I knew, truly knew. The game was about to change. He had absolutely no idea what was coming, not a single clue. The cell door clanged shut with a sound that ripped through the quiet station, leaving a hollow, metallic echo in its wake. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut, a finality that seemed to mock every free breath I'd ever taken. I was truly alone now, in a space that smelled of stale disinfectant, old fear, and a faint, acrid tang of desperation. The cold, hard steel bench pressed against my back, digging into my spine, a constant, brutal reminder of where I was and why. Officer Davis' words still ricocheted in my mind, each one a poisoned dart. "Think you're above the law, huh? Another one of you entitled kids." Entitled. Me. I, Julian Hayes, who had just been walking home from the library, meticulously preparing for my final exams. Walking home to celebrate my sister's birthday dinner. Now I was reduced to a caricature, a suspect, a number. Just another young black man in a system that seemed pre-programmed to chew us up and spit us out. I closed my eyes, trying to force calm into the furious, erratic drumming of my heart. My mind, against my will, replayed the entire degrading encounter, the flashing blue lights, his peremptory tone, his accusatory gaze, already decided, already condemning, the way his hand, heavy and deliberate, hovered over his weapon, as if I were a wild animal. My polite, measured responses, each one delivered with the quiet dignity my parents had instilled in me, yet each one met with escalating aggression, a sneer, a dismissive wave. I had done everything right, spoken clearly, kept my hands visible, open, empty. But in his eyes, my very presence on that street, my very existence as a young black man, confidently walking through, he his territory was an act of defiance. My skin, he seemed to communicate without a single overt slur, was a provocation. It wasn't about the supposed broken tail light on my perfectly maintained car. That was a transparent fiction, a flimsy, threadbare veil for the deep-seated prejudice simmering beneath his uniform, curdling in his gaze. I knew it with a chilling certainty. He knew it too, on some level, even if he masked it with procedural bluster. And now I was paying the devastating price. A cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of my stomach. Mom, Dad, they would be frantic. They believed deeply and passionately in justice. They believed in the sanctity of the law. They had taught me to respect it, to understand its nuances, to uphold its principles. But what do you do? I wondered with a rising tide of despair when the law itself, embodied by a man like Officer Davies, refuses to respect you. When it actively seeks to diminish you, to erase your individuality and replace it with a stereotype. The weight of their potential worry pressed down on me. I imagined my mother, Federal Judge Eleanor Hayes, her brilliant mind already racing, her usually calm demeanor cracking under the stress of her son being held. My father, Dr. Marcus Hayes, the esteemed professor, his quiet strength replaced by a desperate urgency. I wondered if they'd even been called yet, if Davies had bothered to file the paperwork, or if I was simply a nameless face for now, waiting to be processed, categorized, and lost within the sterile, unforgiving machinery of the system. The silence of the cell was not empty. It was deafening. It amplified every negative thought, every creeping fear, every doubt about the fairness of the world they had taught me to trust. Minutes stretched into an eternity, then bled into what felt like hours. Each tick of some unseen clock, each distant muffled sound from beyond the steel door, felt like a hammer blow to my fragile sense of composure. I traced meaningless patterns on the grime-stained wall with my finger, trying desperately to distract myself from the rising tide of panic, the suffocating claustrophobia. This couldn't be happening. Not to me. Not like this. Not after everything. Suddenly, the heavy door creaked open with a groan that echoed the one in my soul. My head snapped up, hope warring with dread. It was Davies again. His smirk was wider this time, a cruel, self-satisfied curve to his lips, a palpable sense of triumph in his eyes. He hadn't just made an arrest. He had won a personal battle. "Still think you're innocent, big man?" he sneered, leaning casually against the doorframe, a physical barrier blocking my only exit, a metaphor for my entire situation. "Maybe a night in here will teach you some manners. Learn to respect authority. Learn your place." My jaw tightened, the muscles clenching. "I haven't done anything wrong, officer," I managed, my voice steadier than the earthquake rumbling through my chest. "And I deserve to make a phone call. It's my right." He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. "Phone call? We'll get to that. Plenty of time. We've got bigger fish to fry than your little story." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over me, from my slightly rumpled shirt to my worn but clean sneakers, a silent, contemptuous judgment in his eyes. "You think you're special, don't you? With your fancy clothes and your college talk. But in here, you're just another suspect, another name on a long, long list." He then pulled a folded piece of paper from his uniform pocket. My heart gave a frantic leap, a flicker of hope that it might be a release form or a message. But he unfolded it slowly, deliberately, a theatrical gesture. It was a mugshot, not mine. An old grainy image of a young black man, looking defiant and utterly lost, his eyes haunted. "This kid," Davies began, his tone dripping with a false, saccharine pity that was more insulting than outright anger. He thought he was special too, talked a big game, said he was going places, ended up doing 5 years for something similar to what you're trying to pull. Now he's back out, probably doing the same old thing, just with a little more prison smarts. He looked from the picture to me, then back to the picture. A silent, unmistakable comparison. Doesn't matter how smart you are, how well you speak, the street has a way of pulling you back. It swallows people like you whole. He wasn't just talking about the picture, he was talking about me. He was painting me into a stereotype, a predetermined narrative he'd already decided for me, long before he even pulled me over. It was a warning, a threat, a complete cold blooded dehumanization, stripping away everything my parents had worked to build, everything I had worked to become. My hands clenched into tight fists, nails digging into my palms. I felt a cold, terrifying rage begin to simmer beneath the fear, a primal heat that threatened to boil over. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was an assault on my dignity, my identity, my very humanity. He didn't just want to arrest me, he wanted to break me, to make me feel small, worthless, another statistic. I will not be that kid, officer, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, low, but infused with an iron will. And I will be calling my parents. They're expecting me. They know my rights. Davies laughed again, a harsh, grating sound that vibrated with his contempt. He folded the mugshot, tucking it back into his pocket with a triumphant snap. Oh, I'm sure they are. Don't worry, we'll get around to it. Eventually, after we've had our little chat. He pushed off the doorframe, letting the heavy door swing shut with another mournful final clang. The sound resonated, trapping me once more in my isolated, suffocating world. But something had shifted inside me. His words, his deliberate, cruel attempt to belittle me, to strip away my future and replace it with a bleak past, had ignited a different kind of fire. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now irrevocably mixed with a quiet, burning resolve. I wouldn't just sit here and let him define me. I couldn't. My parents hadn't raised me for that. They had raised me to stand tall, even when the world tried to push me down. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady myself. My mother, a federal judge. My father, a respected professor of law. They knew how this world worked, how its darker currents flowed. They had fought battles like this their entire lives, often quietly, sometimes with thunder. They would know what to do. The question was, how long would it take them to find me? And what kind of fight, what kind of storm would their arrival unleash? A few minutes later, the silence of the station was abruptly broken. I heard voices from down the hall, not just casual chatter, but urgent, hushed tones, rising and falling with an unfamiliar intensity. Then a distinct, sharp command, cutting through the background hum. The entire tenor of the station seemed to subtly change, almost perceptibly. A sudden, almost palpable shift in the air, like the hushed calm before a hurricane makes landfall, or perhaps before a reckoning descends. The sound of heavy footsteps approaching, not shuffling or wandering, but purposeful, authoritative, making their way directly down my corridor. My heart pounded anew, a frantic drumbeat in my chest. But this time, it wasn't solely fear. It was anticipation. Something was happening, and I had a feeling my world was about to be shaken. The police cruiser pulled up. A stark, grey brick building loomed, a symbol of cold authority. My handcuffs dug into my wrists. The street's chaos had faded, replaced by a chilling quiet. A cold dread seeped into my bones. Inside, the air hung heavy, with the scent of stale coffee and something metallic. Harsh fluorescent lights hummed, casting long, stark shadows. Every surface seemed to reflect an impersonal chill. This place was designed to strip you down, to make you feel invisible. Officer Miller, his posture still annoyingly confident, led me through a maze of sterile corridors. Each door we passed felt like another barrier slamming shut. Each turn, another step deeper into a system. I suddenly found myself trapped within. I was no longer Michael, the student. I was just another suspect. They brought me to a counter. An officer, her face devoid of emotion, began the routine. My name, my address, date of birth. It felt like they were trying to erase me piece by piece. My pockets were emptied. My wallet, my phone, my keys, all my connection to the outside world, neatly bagged and tagged. It was a symbolic theft, my life boxed away. Then came the fingerprints. Each press of my fingers onto the cold ink pad felt like a permanent mark, a brand, the mugshot, a blank wall, a blinding flash, my face caught in a moment of raw vulnerability. I tried to keep my chin up, but a part of me felt utterly exposed. Officer Miller stood nearby, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He watched the process with an almost predatory satisfaction. Just routine, he muttered, but his eyes held a triumphant glint. They said, I got you. Finally, the moment arrived. One phone call, the booking officer stated, her voice flat. My chance. My mother. She was the one person who could cut through this nightmare. My fingers trembled as I dialed. The number I knew by heart. It rang and rang. Then, voicemail. You've reached Judge Davies. Please leave a message. My stomach dropped. She must be in court. Her phone always off during proceedings. I left a hurried message, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to sound desperate. Mom, it's Michael. I'm at the precinct. There's been an incident. Officer Miller, please, call me back as soon as you get this. My voice cracked on the last word. A crushing wave of helplessness washed over me. The one person who could help, unreachable. It was a cold, hard slap of reality. I was alone in this. For now. They led me to a small room, an interrogation room, a metal table, 2 chairs. The air was thick with unspoken questions. I sat, my mind racing. What would they ask? What should I say? I remembered my mother's stern advice. Never speak without a lawyer present. Miller walked in, eventually, alone. He didn't sit immediately. He just leaned against the doorframe, observing me, like a predator sizing up its prey. His voice was low, almost a purr. So, Michael, still think you're above the law? I remained silent. I kept my gaze steady. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, assault on an officer, he listed, ticking off invisible boxes in the air. Each word a hammer blow against my future. Assault? I hadn't touched him. It was a lie, a blatant, terrifying lie. He walked closer, placing a flimsy file on the table with a theatrical flourish. We have witnesses. We have your attitude. It's an open and shut case, kid. Might as well make it easier on yourself. My heart pounded against my ribs. This was it. This was where they tried to break you. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. I thought of my mother, her strength, her unwavering belief in justice. I closed my eyes for a second, drawing on that memory. I'd like to speak with my lawyer, I finally said, my voice firmer than I expected. And I've already called my mother. Miller scoffed. Your mommy? Right. Think she can get you out of this one? His tone was dripping with disdain. Everyone thinks they know a lawyer. Everyone thinks they're special. He left, slamming the door. The sound echoed in the small room. A few minutes later, another officer came in. Come on, holding cell. He didn't even look at me. The cell was cold, sterile. A concrete slab served as a bed. A thin, scratchy blanket offered little comfort. The smell of disinfectant mixed with something else, despair. I sat down on the slab, wrapping the blanket around me. My phone was gone. My freedom was gone. My mother was unreachable. A profound sense of loneliness enveloped me. Was this how it ended? My dreams, my future, all extinguished by one prejudiced officer's malicious intent. But then, a flicker, a tiny spark. My mother. She wouldn't let this stand. She couldn't. She was a force of nature, a federal judge. She had faced down far worse. I imagined her, sitting on her bench, her gavel in hand, her sharp mind dissecting arguments, her eyes seeing through deception. She would know. She would understand. She would act. The uncertainty gnawed at me. How long until she got my message? Would she even check her voicemail after a long day in court? What if she couldn't reach me? The cold, hard reality of the cell was a stark reminder of my current powerlessness. But the image of my mother, strong and resolute, was a quiet promise. A promise of a storm about to break. I just had to hold on and wait. The air in the holding cell was cold and heavy. It smelled of stale despair and forgotten promises. I sat on the hard bench, wrists still aching from the cuffs. Officer Miller's words echoed. Another one trying to play smart. His face twisted in that familiar sneer. My crime? Existing. Being black in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or perhaps the right time for him. I closed my eyes, tried to push back the fear. My mother's voice usually brought comfort. Michael, hold your head high. Always. Know your rights and never let anyone diminish your worth. But what good were rights in a place like this, in a system designed to ignore them? My worth felt chipped away, piece by painful piece, by every prejudiced glare. Time crawled. Every minute felt like an hour. I heard muffled voices from the corridor, the occasional clank of a door, footsteps passing my cell. No one looked in. I was just another number, another statistic, another kid who dared to exist. Then the tone of the voices outside changed. There was a sharpness, a sudden edge, not anger, not panic, something else, a note of surprise. Then a distinct, firm voice. It cut through the station's usual hum. It was calm, measured, unmistakably familiar. My heart leaped. My mother. It had to be her. I couldn't see her from my cell, but I knew that tone. It was the voice she used when she was asking a question that wasn't really a question. The one that demanded an answer and demanded respect. The voice that commanded attention without ever raising its pitch. I pressed my ear against the cold metal door, tried to make out the words. Muffled fragments reached me. My son. Arrested. Officer Miller. A different officer's voice, rough and impatient, responded. Ma'am, you'll have to wait. We're processing a suspect. A slight pause. Then my mother's voice, even lower, even more resolute. I understand you're processing a suspect. I'm here to inquire about the specific charges and the officer involved. There was a dismissive chuckle from the other officer. Look, ma'am, this isn't a negotiation. We have protocols. My blood boiled. They were treating her like she was just another hysterical mother. They had no idea who they were dealing with. My mother was a force of nature, a quiet storm. They were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Another voice joined the conversation, closer now. Officer Miller's. Everything okay out here, Sergeant? Just a concerned parent, Miller. Nothing to worry about. The sergeant sounded annoyed. Oh, her, Miller said, a note of smug triumph in his voice. Figured she'd show up. Always the same story. Kids acting out, parents rushing to their defense. My mother's voice then, clearer this time. Officer Miller, I presume you are the arresting officer? He seemed to take a step closer. His tone was condescending. That's right, ma'am. And your son was resisting. Disorderly conduct. We have it all on file. Resisting what, precisely? My mother's voice was like ice, controlled. But I knew the tremor beneath. It was the sound of her patience wearing thin. Miller laughed. A short, dismissive bark. Resisting arrest, ma'am. Pretty standard. He knows the drill. Does he now? My mother paused. The silence that followed felt vast. It stretched, taut and uncomfortable. And you believe my son, Michael Davies, knows the drill? I heard faint shuffling. The sergeant cleared his throat. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. They weren't quite as dismissive now. Something in her tone must have pricked their arrogance. Ma'am, if you wish to see him, we can arrange that after he's booked, the sergeant said, a little less impatiently. No, my mother said. Her voice was sharper now, though still quiet. I don't wish to see him. I wish to address the matter of his unlawful arrest, and I wish to speak with someone in charge. Immediately? Another pause. Longer this time. I imagined them exchanging confused glances. They were probably wondering if she was a lawyer. But even a lawyer wouldn't have that particular quality of quiet command. Someone in charge? Miller scoffed. I'm in charge of this situation, ma'am. No, Officer Miller. My mother's voice sliced through his bravado. You are most certainly not. I'm asking to speak with the precinct captain, or, failing that, the district attorney's office. Now the silence was heavy with something new. Not just annoyance, a flicker of doubt, a seed of apprehension. I heard a nervous cough. This wasn't their usual walk-in. This wasn't a mother they could easily dismiss. Ma'am, this is an active investigation, the sergeant stammered. We can't just— Oh, you most certainly can, my mother interrupted, her voice gaining a steely edge. Because if you cannot provide me with a supervisor who can address this immediately, then I will be forced to take this directly to a higher authority. I heard footsteps retreating, fast and light. Someone was scurrying away. The sergeant's voice was now laced with an unfamiliar hesitancy. And who, precisely, would that higher authority be, ma'am? I smiled to myself in the dim light of the cell. Oh, they were about to find out? My mother's next words were spoken calmly, but they hit like a thunderclap. I am Judge Eleanor Davies, and I believe we have a serious issue here concerning the conduct of one of your officers. A very serious issue indeed. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of men suddenly realizing they had crossed a line. Not just any line, but one drawn in the very foundations of the law they claimed to uphold. The air felt charged with unspoken apologies, with dawning horror. I could almost hear the blood drain from their faces. The game, I realized, had just changed, and it was my mother who was now holding all the cards. Their smug certainty was about to shatter into a million pieces. My mother moved with a quiet intensity. It wasn't anger she showed. Not anymore. It was precision, like a surgeon preparing for a delicate, essential operation. Her eyes held a steady fire, a deep, unwavering commitment. She had always taught me about the law, not just the words in books, but the spirit of it. Justice, fairness, accountability. Now, she was embodying every lesson, every principle she had ever upheld from the bench. The first step was a formal complaint, not just a call to internal affairs. This was a meticulously drafted document. It outlined every detail of that night, every word Officer Davies had uttered, every unnecessary shove, every violation of protocol. It wasn't just my word. My mother had already secured statements from the bystanders who had seen everything, from the precinct desk sergeant, who, once he knew who was asking, became remarkably cooperative. The weight of her office, the sheer gravitas of a sitting federal judge was undeniable. It opened doors. It commanded attention. It cut through the usual bureaucratic haze that often shielded officers from scrutiny. I watched her, sometimes from a distance, sometimes sitting across her desk as she spoke to her legal team. They weren't just any lawyers. These were people she trusted implicitly, experts in civil rights, constitutional law. Their faces were grim but determined. They understood the gravity. They understood the importance of sending a message. We need to establish a pattern, I overheard her say one evening, the phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, but each word resonated with authority. This isn't an isolated incident. This is systemic, and Officer Davies is a symptom. A few days later, the first official notice arrived for Officer Davies, not from my mother directly, but from the district attorney's office. A notice of an internal investigation, a request for his full report on my arrest, and a warning. Any attempt to obstruct, to tamper, to retaliate would be met with severe consequences. I remember the tremor of fear I felt when I heard that. Fear for him. Surprisingly, not because I wished him well, but because I knew what my mother was capable of. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was seeking justice. And that distinction, I realized, made her far more formidable. Officer Davies, I later heard through the grapevine, initially scoffed. He laughed it off to his colleagues. Another complaint from one of those types. He'd been through it before, he boasted. Nothing ever stuck. He was bulletproof. He thought his badge, his uniform, his skin made him invincible. But this was different. The internal investigation wasn't just a formality, it was a deep dive. My mother had ensured it. She had laid out a path that was impossible to ignore. Witnesses were being re-interviewed. My own statement, clear and concise, backed by other accounts. Security camera footage from the gas station, though grainy, showed the disproportionate force. Then came the second notice, more serious this time, a summons to appear. Before an internal review board, his colleagues started to look at him differently. The easy camaraderie in the squad room began to fray. Whispers followed him. Judge Miller. The name carried weight. It conjured images of the federal courthouse, of high-stakes cases, of power beyond their daily grasp. He started to realize this wasn't just a nuisance complaint. This wasn't going to disappear. This wasn't some minor reprimand that would be forgotten after a few weeks. My mother was building a case that could take away everything he held dear, his job, his pension, his reputation. I saw the change in him, indirectly, through news reports, through the faces of other officers who now seemed to avoid eye contact with me if I ever happened to be near the precinct. They knew, they understood the shifting tides. His confidence, once a fortress, was cracking. He tried to project an air of nonchalance, but the effort was visible. He began to make mistakes, small, unprofessional missteps that, under normal circumstances, might be overlooked. But not now. Every action was under a microscope. Every word was recorded. My mother made sure of it. She wasn't just preparing for an indictment. She was meticulously dissecting a pattern of behavior, exposing it, layer by painful layer. She wanted not just to punish one officer, but to illuminate a larger truth. That power, when unchecked, becomes oppression, and that justice, even if delayed, would eventually arrive. I watched her, my own fear slowly giving way to a quiet awe. She wasn't shouting, wasn't raging. She was simply applying the law with unwavering force. The gears of justice, often slow, often grinding, were finally turning. And they were turning for me, for us. The formal indictment was coming. I felt it in the air. A palpable shift. The officer's arrogance had met an immovable force. His world was about to change, irrevocably. And this was just the beginning. The real battle was still ahead. The courtroom, the public eye, the full weight of the law. But the first blow had been struck. And it had landed. The silence in our home was different now. Not the hollow silence of despair, but a heavy quiet, filled with the weight of expectation. My mother, Judge Sharma, moved through it with a new kind of intensity. Her legal mind, usually reserved for the complex intricacies of federal law, was now razor sharp, focused entirely on the injustice done to me. I watched her, sometimes from my bedroom door, sometimes across the breakfast table. She wasn't just a judge anymore. She was a mother on a mission. Her brow was often furrowed, her eyes distant, replaying scenes I hadn't even witnessed. She was building a case, not in a courtroom yet, but in her mind, piece by meticulous piece. This isn't just about you, Marcus, she had told me, her voice soft but firm. This is about every young black man who has ever been made to feel less than, every person who has had their dignity stripped away by someone in a uniform. Her words resonated deep within me. The shame of that day still clung to me like a shadow. The glares, the accusations, the feeling of utter helplessness. It had changed me. I saw the world differently now. A layer of innocence had been peeled away, replaced by a raw understanding of how fragile justice could be. My mother spent hours on the phone. Her voice, usually so composed, would occasionally take on an edge I rarely heard. I knew she was speaking to lawyers, to contacts in the district attorney's office, to anyone who could help peel back the layers of bureaucratic protection around Officer Miller. She wasn't just demanding justice, she was crafting it. One evening, she called me into her study. The room, usually a sanctuary of leather-bound books and quiet contemplation, felt charged. She had papers spread across her large desk. "Marcus," she said, her finger tracing a line on a document, "we have enough for an internal affairs investigation to be taken seriously. The preliminary reports from the witness testimonies are strong, and your own account, detailed and consistent, is crucial." My chest tightened. Recounting the events of that day over and over was like reliving a nightmare. Each time I felt the cold grip of the handcuffs, the rough push against the car, the sneer on Officer Miller's face. But I knew I had to do it. For myself, for my mother, for the promise of something better. "They're trying to stonewall, of course," she continued, a flicker of something close to anger in her eyes. "Standard procedure, protect their own, but they don't know who they're dealing with." Her gaze met mine, and in it I saw not just determination, but a quiet fury, a mother's fury. Officer Miller, I imagined, was still walking around with that same swagger, believing he was untouchable. He probably thought this whole thing would blow over. Just another complaint from those people. But he had made a grave mistake. He had picked a fight, not just with a young man, but with the principle of justice itself, and with a woman who had dedicated her life to upholding it. The calls from the press started to trickle in. My mother had carefully controlled the narrative, ensuring that our privacy was mostly protected. But the scent of a story, especially one involving a federal judge and a police misconduct allegation, was too potent to ignore entirely. She issued a carefully worded statement, emphasizing the need for due process and transparency. It was a subtle signal, a warning shot across the bow of the police department. My friends were supportive, but I could feel their unease. They saw what had happened to me, and it was a reminder of what could happen to any of them. It was a heavy burden, carrying that realization. The incident had created a fissure in our world, exposing the raw vulnerability beneath the surface of everyday life. My mother began to spend more time at the courthouse, even on weekends. Not her federal court, but the local municipal courthouse, where the gears of the city's justice system ground slowly. She was observing, learning, building her strategy. She wasn't just a concerned parent. She was a master strategist, preparing for a complex legal battle. The district attorney's office, initially hesitant, was now showing more interest. The weight of Judge Sharma's reputation, combined with the mounting evidence, was becoming undeniable. The internal affairs investigation, once a formality, was now a serious inquiry. They were interviewing other officers, looking for any cracks in Miller's story, any previous complaints that might have been swept under the rug. I could almost feel the net tightening. Each day, my mother's resolve seemed to harden, her focus sharpen. She was meticulous, relentless. She explained to me that the system was designed to protect itself, to make it difficult for ordinary citizens to challenge authority. But we were not ordinary citizens. Not entirely. We had knowledge, resources, and an unwavering belief in what was right. It will take time, Marcus, she cautioned me one evening as we sat together, the city lights twinkling outside our window. But every step we take, no matter how small, is a step closer. Justice isn't a single event, it's a journey, and we are just beginning to pave this road. I looked at her. My incredible mother? She wasn't seeking revenge, not in the petty sense. She was seeking accountability. She was fighting for something larger than just me. She was fighting to affirm that the law applied to everyone, even those who wore a badge. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, a new feeling stirred within me. Not just anger or shame, but a quiet, growing hope. The hope that soon, very soon, the tables would turn, and Officer Miller would finally face the consequences of his actions, consequences brought forth by the very system he thought he controlled. The foundation was laid, the machinery was in motion, and the next phase was about to begin. The world had shrunk for Officer Miller. From the wide, arrogant stride of authority, his existence had condensed into a sterile courtroom antechamber. The cold metal of a defendant's chair, the rustle of legal papers that dictated his fate. For me, the world had expanded. Each breath felt deeper, each memory of that night less suffocating. The shame had begun to lift, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning sense of vindication. My mother, Judge Vance, had kept her word. Not with an angry outburst, but with the precise, deliberate hammer of the law. The grand jury had met. The evidence presented was undeniable. Surveillance footage, witness testimonies, my own clear account. The initial police report, which Officer Miller had tried to manipulate, now stood as a testament to his deceit. The charges were clear: false arrest, abuse of authority, obstruction of justice. The day the indictment came down, the air in our home was different, not celebratory, but weighty. My mother sat at the dining table, her posture straight, her expression thoughtful. She wasn't gloating, she was simply resolved. "Justice isn't a game, Marcus," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's a responsibility, especially for those of us sworn to uphold it." I understood then the immense burden she carried, not just as a mother defending her son, but as a federal judge ensuring the system worked, even when one of its own had failed so spectacularly. She had opened a door, not just for me, but potentially for countless others who had suffered similar injustices in silence. Officer Miller had been formally relieved of duty, his badge confiscated. He was out on bail, a privilege I hadn't been afforded that night. His future, once secured by his uniform, was now crumbling under the weight of his own prejudice. I heard whispers through legal channels my mother had access to about his panic, his frantic calls to lawyers, his disbelief that a routine arrest had escalated into a career-ending, life-altering catastrophe. He saw it as unfair. He couldn't grasp that the unfairness began with him. For him, it was a sudden, unforeseen earthquake. For me, it was the long-awaited dawn after a never-ending night. The terror of the handcuffs, the cold steel of the cell, the mocking smirk on his face. Those images still flickered, but now they were framed by the knowledge of what was to come for him. My mother never discussed the specifics of his defense or his personal despair. She focused on the process, the integrity of the courts, the necessity of accountability. She prepared for the next phase, the trial itself, with the same meticulous care she gave to any case. For her, this was not personal revenge, but systemic correction. For me, it felt like a lifeline, pulling me from the depths of a nightmare. I began to feel safe again, truly safe. The fear of random encounters, of being seen as less than, started to recede. My mother had not just freed me from a cell, she had freed me from a certain kind of fear that shadowed so many black men. But the fight wasn't over. The indictment was just the beginning of the legal journey. Officer Miller would have his day in court. He would face a jury, and we would be there, watching, waiting for the final verdict, for justice to speak its full truth. What would that day bring? And what would it truly mean for all of us? The next steps were etched into the calendar, looming large, promising a resolution, but also a final public confrontation with the man who had tried to erase my dignity. The air crackled. It wasn't just the sirens anymore. It was the weight of a gaze. My mother, Judge Harper, stood there, poised and still. Her voice, usually soft at home, resonated with an authority that silenced the street. "Officer Davies," she began, her eyes fixed on the man who had just cuffed her son. "You have just unlawfully detained a minor." Officer Davis, his face still flushed with a misplaced sense of triumph, scoffed. "Ma'am, this is a police matter. Stay back." My mother didn't move. A quiet, knowing smile touched her lips. A police matter indeed. One that will soon become a federal matter, I assure you. The other officers, who had been standing by, shifted uncomfortably. They knew her. They recognized the power she carried, even out of robes. Davies, though, seemed willfully blind. "Are you interfering with an arrest, ma'am?" he challenged, taking a step closer. His voice held a false bravado. My mother's smile vanished. "I am identifying myself, officer. I am Judge Eleanor Harper, and that," she pointed to me, "is my son, Marcus Harper." The name hit Davies like a physical blow. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face. He stammered, Judge Harper? I didn't." "No," she interrupted, her voice cutting through his feeble excuses. "You didn't. You saw a young black man. You made assumptions. You acted on prejudice, Officer Davies, not law." She turned to the other officers. "Release my son." Immediately. A younger officer hesitated, then moved to my side. With trembling hands, he began to undo the cuffs. The cold metal fell from my wrists. The relief was a wave washing over me. My mother's gaze returned to Davies. "You will not touch my son again, or anyone else's, if I have anything to say about it." She pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved swiftly. "This is Judge Harper. I need District Attorney Miller on the line, now. It's urgent." Davies stood frozen, watching his world unravel in real time. The other officers were suddenly very busy, looking anywhere but at him. The respect they had shown him minutes before evaporated. She spoke into the phone, calm, deliberate. "Mr. Miller, I am at the corner of Oak and Vine. Officer Davies of your precinct has just engaged in a clear case of racial profiling, false arrest, and excessive force against my son, Marcus Harper. Yes, my son. I witnessed the entire incident. I am requesting an immediate grand jury indictment. My heart pounded. Indictment. That word. So heavy with consequence. My mother, the federal judge, was not just talking. She was acting. The DA, on the other end, was clearly scrambling. My mother listened, then responded firmly. I understand, but this is not a request for an internal review, Mr. Miller. This is a demand for justice. For my son. For every young man who looks like him. I expect an immediate suspension and a full investigation leading to charges. If not, I will personally escalate this to the Department of Justice. A silence hung in the air after she hung up. Davis looked as if he might vomit. His uniform, which moments ago had seemed so formidable, now looked like a costume. My mother took my arm, her touch gentle but firm. Let's go, Marcus. We walked past Davies. He couldn't meet my eyes. His arrogance was shattered, replaced by a raw, naked fear, the fear of consequences. The next few days were a blur of legal proceedings. My mother moved with quiet, focused intensity. She wasn't just my mother. She was a force of nature, a guardian of justice. The DA, under the formidable pressure, moved quickly. Officer Davies was suspended without pay. The internal investigation began, but it was clear it was a formality. My mother had presented undeniable evidence, her own unimpeachable testimony, and the weight of her federal position. The grand jury convened. Witnesses were called. My own testimony, though difficult, was clear and unwavering. I recounted every detail, every sneer, every unjustified command, the coldness of the handcuffs, the casual cruelty of his words. Days turned into weeks. The news spread like wildfire. Federal judges, son unjustly arrested. Officer faces indictment in racial profiling case. The story became a national discussion, a lightning rod for conversations about policing and systemic bias. I saw Officer Davies once more, not on the street but in a courthouse corridor. He was dressed in a rumpled suit, his face haggard. The swagger was gone, the casual disdain replaced by a haunted look. He walked past me, head down, a ghost of the man who had tried to diminish me. The indictment came. It was swift and unequivocal. Officer Davies was charged with false arrest, abuse of authority, and civil rights violations. The system, slow and often resistant to change, had been forced to move, not because of a protest, not because of a viral video alone, but because an unstoppable force of justice had stepped in. The trial was a painful but necessary process. My mother was not directly involved in the prosecution, but her presence, her silent dignity in the gallery, was a powerful statement. She watched, a mother and a judge, as the truth unfolded. Officer Davies tried to justify his actions, to paint me as a threat, to twist the narrative. But the evidence, the cold hard facts, and the unyielding pursuit of justice by the prosecution stood against him. My mother had ensured there were no loopholes, no convenient oversights. The verdict came, guilty on multiple counts. The courtroom was silent. Then a quiet murmur rose, not of triumph, but of profound, somber justice. Davies was sentenced to prison time, not a life sentence, but enough to mark him, to make him accountable for his choices, enough to send a clear message. The uniform would no longer shield him. The badge would no longer protect his prejudice. Afterward, as the cameras flashed and reporters clamored, my mother and I walked out of the courthouse. She didn't speak to the press. Her work was done. We drove home in silence. The city lights blurred outside the window. I looked at her, my mother, who had moved mountains for me. "Thank you, Mom," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. She reached over, squeezing my hand. Her eyes, tired but resolute, met mine. No, Marcus, thank you for standing strong, for being you. Ibiji continued, her voice soft. This wasn't just for you, my son. It was for every child who has been made to feel small, invisible, or dangerous, simply because of the color of their skin. It was a reminder that justice, though sometimes slow, can still prevail, and that power, true power, lies in upholding what is right, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means confronting the very systems we are meant to trust. The incident had changed us both. It had shattered my naive belief that simply being good was enough to be safe. It had shown me the insidious nature of prejudice and the incredible strength required to fight it. But it had also shown me the profound power of a mother's love and the unyielding force of true justice when wielded by those who refused to compromise. I was no longer just Marcus, the young man who was wrongly arrested. I was Marcus, the young man who had seen injustice, felt its sting, and witnessed its defeat. And with my mother by my side, I knew that the fight for a truly just world was far from over. It was a fight we would continue, together, one quiet, unwavering step at a time. The echoes of Officer Davies' shattered authority would serve as a constant reminder. Justice, real justice, leaves its mark.